The thought of my daughter sleeping with that fat pig makes my stomach turn. Just minutes before the wedding, I heard my son-in-law confess it to a friend. They all laughed. My daughter had no idea about her husband's true character. I forced a slight smile and began to prepare the trap that would leave him with nothing. If you are watching this video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you are listening to my story of revenge from. That Sunday morning, the sun was just beginning to warm the stone steps of the St. Francis Church in the city. I adjusted the knot of my tie, which was too tight for my liking, and ran my hand over my dark suit, trying to smooth out the wrinkles that my nerves had marked since dawn. The guests were arriving little by little, greeting each other with hugs, with pats on the back, and with words of congratulations that I received with a polite smile. "It is finally time, Mr. Robert. Your daughter is marrying a good businessman," an old friend told me while squeezing my shoulder tightly. I nodded without responding too much, because deep down that phrase, repeated so many times in the last few weeks, always left a strange taste in my mouth. In the courtyard, the violins and trumpets of a small band resonated, animating the wait. The air smelled of fresh brewed coffee and sweet pastries, dusted with sugar, that the women of the parish offered to the guests. The laughter, the conversations, and the musical notes mixed, creating a festive atmosphere. I, however, felt a weight in my chest that forced me to excuse myself and walk toward the side aisle of the church in search of fresh air. The corridor was paved with large stone slabs. The wind brought with it the sweet perfume of the bougainvillea that adorned the walls, and for a moment I let myself be enveloped by that familiar aroma that I had felt so many times at the ranch. I waved to a couple of neighbors who crossed paths with me and watched some children running between the columns, playing hide and seek in their new suits. Everything seemed normal, like at any country wedding. But as I approached the door of the room where Ben, my future son-in-law, was getting ready, the murmur of voices turned into scandalous laughter that broke the silence of the hallway. I stopped, bewildered. The wooden door was slightly ajar, and it was inevitable to hear what was happening inside. First, I clearly distinguished Ben's voice, that voice that had been shown to be kind in front of me so many times. Just thinking about sleeping with that fat pig makes my stomach turn. Time stood still. I felt my blood boil and my legs go rigid. One of his friends burst into laughter and added with cheekiness, "At least you get the ranch and all of Mr. Robert's money." There was a toast. I heard the sound of glass clinking, the laughter, the dragging of a chair. Another of the men, with a mocking tone, shouted, "Surely you will have to drink a whole bottle of whiskey to perform tonight." My hands were trembling. I got even closer to the crack in the door and heard Ben's voice again, cold and calculating. "Of course, I put up with it for the money." Without the lands of Chestnut Grove, I would not even look at her. The laughter resonated like whips. Someone even whistled in a mocking tone. I felt like my heart was being ripped out. Every word was a blow that fell directly on my dignity as a father. I took a step back, dizzy, and as I did so, I bumped into a neighbor who was passing through the corridor. She looked at me surprised, noticing my pale face. "Are you okay, Mr. Robert? You look pale." With an effort that cost me more than carrying sacks of corn in my youth, I managed to respond. "Nothing, ma'am, just a little heat." I kept walking with hurried steps, the echo of those phrases still drilling into my ears. I could not let anyone else notice what I had heard, at least not yet. I headed to the room where Emily was getting ready. Upon entering, the scene seemed taken from a postcard. My daughter, dressed in white, sitting in front of the mirror, the veil falling like a waterfall over her shoulders. She smiled nervously while the makeup artist gave her the final touches, and Laura, her best friend, adjusted the veil with care. Two bridesmaids were coming and going, carrying fresh water and trays with muffins to calm the bride's nerves. Seeing her like that, so excited, squeezed my heart even more. The image of the little girl I had seen grow up now turned into a woman about to take such an important step, contrasted cruelly with the words I had just heard behind that door. I knocked softly, and upon entering, everyone turned around surprised. "I need to speak with my daughter alone," I said with a firm voice. They looked at each other, hesitated for a few seconds, but finally agreed. One by one, they left the room, leaving only Emily, Laura, and me. I closed the door slowly, took a few steps forward, and sat in front of my daughter. I noticed how her hands played nervously with the bouquet of flowers, not knowing yet that my world had broken a few minutes before. In that instant, I knew that my daughter's happiness was about to be crushed by the bitterest betrayal, and I, her father, was facing the hardest decision of my life: to stay silent and let her go ahead with a lie, or tell her the truth and destroy in seconds the illusion she had dreamed of since she was a child. The story of that day, the day I heard with my own ears how they mocked my daughter, was just beginning, and from that moment, every breath became an effort to protect her, even if she did not know it yet. I sat in front of my daughter, dragging a wooden chair that creaked on the polished floor. I placed my hands on top of hers, still trembling from the emotion of the wedding. Emily looked at me through the mirror. Her eyes shone with illusion, but also with nervousness. The veil fell delicately over her shoulders, and the freshly applied makeup gave her the air of a princess. I, on the other hand, could barely sustain her gaze, knowing what I was about to say. I took a deep breath, looking for the softest way to start. "Daughter," I said with a hoarse voice, "I need you to listen to me calmly." Outside, in Ben's room, I just heard something that broke my soul. Emily arched her eyebrows, still with that nervous smile on her lips. "What happened, Dad?" she asked, tilting her head. I swallowed hard. There was no way to sweeten what I had heard. "Ben, your fiancé," I said slowly, as if every word weighed tons. "He was laughing with his friends." I heard it clearly. "He said he was only marrying you for the money, for the ranch, and he called you a fat pig." The silence became heavy, interrupted barely by the distant murmur of the guests in the atrium. Emily looked at me in disbelief, opened her mouth, and let out a brief laugh, almost forced. "Dad, that cannot be," she murmured, squeezing the bouquet tighter. "You heard wrong. Ben always tells me I am beautiful." "Always." I saw how her lips trembled and how her eyes began to get wet. "No, daughter," I responded firmly. "I did not hear wrong. He repeated it several times. His friends were making fun of you, and he himself confirmed it." Emily shook her head. The tears began to run down her cheeks, ruining the makeup little by little. Laura, who was behind her adjusting the veil, intervened immediately. "Mr. Robert, with all due respect, perhaps someone is inventing things. I have seen how much Ben takes care of her. He is always attentive to Emily. He treats her with affection." I turned to look at her. In her face there was a cold security, too firm to be innocent. Her hands squeezed Emily's shoulders as if she wanted to keep her in that seat. "Laura, I am not speaking from rumors. I heard it with my own ears," I insisted, raising my voice a little. Emily sobbed, covering her face with both hands. The bouquet fell on her legs. "No," she moaned. "I do not want to hear it. It cannot be true." Laura caressed her back with a protective gesture. "Friend, do not let this ruin your day. Nerves make one imagine things. Your dad is just worried, but we must not exaggerate." I clenched my fists on my knees, fighting against the helplessness. "Emily," I continued softer, "I would give my life for you. I would not lie to you about something like this. I prefer you to hate me for telling you the truth than for you to suffer from a deception." She lowered her hands and looked directly at me. Her eyes, red, were full of confusion. "Dad, do you really believe that Ben does not love me? That everything is for money?" I nodded with regret. "Yes, daughter, that was what I heard. And it hurts me more than anyone to have to tell you." Laura took a step forward, crossing almost between Emily and me. "Mr. Robert, I am sorry, but I think you are letting your prejudices speak for you. Ben is a hard-working man, a businessman. It is natural that he talks about money, but that does not mean he does not love Emily. I noticed how Laura sought Emily's gaze, as if trying to sow doubt in her towards me. In that instant, someone knocked on the door. One of the bridesmaids poked her head in, hurried. "Quick, it is time. The priest is waiting for you." The sound of the bells began to resonate strongly in the church, marking that the ceremony had to begin. Emily wiped her tears with the back of her hand, trembling. Laura took a handkerchief from her purse, opened it, and with agile movements fixed the smudged makeup. "Come on, friend," she told her in a low voice. "Do not ruin this day. Do not think about ugly things." Emily took a deep breath, took the bouquet again, and nodded. I remained standing, mute, watching as my daughter stood up and instead of hugging me or believing me, clung to Laura's arm like a lifesaver. "Dad, please, do not say anything else." "Not now." The words went through me like a knife. I wanted to reply, but the urgency of the moment gave me no space. Emily left first, followed by Laura, who threw me a look I will not forget, a mixture of challenge and triumph. I walked behind with heavy steps. In the side aisle, the guests were crowded together. The music of the band was already tuning the instruments for the reception. The voices mixed in a growing murmur. The emotion of the moment wrapped everyone. We arrived at the main entrance. Emily appeared on the threshold, radiant, with a forced smile on her lips. Ben was already waiting for her, impeccable in his suit, with an expression of insulting security. My daughter took him by the arm. The people began to applaud and murmur. What a beautiful bride! What pride for Mr. Robert! I, in the middle of all those comments, felt a knot in my throat. I headed to my seat in the front row, still listening to the echo of that cursed phrase that had destroyed me minutes before. I saw Emily walk toward the altar, clinging to the man who had humiliated her without her knowing it, and while the guests said that I should be proud, the only thing I felt was unbearable pain, as if every step of my daughter toward the altar took her a little further away from me. The church organ began to play. Everyone stood up. I remained seated for an instant, breathing deeply, trying not to collapse in front of everyone. In the end, I stood up slowly, with my eyes fixed on my daughter, knowing that she was entering the wolf's mouth, and I, her father, had not managed to stop her. The church bells rang out with force, filling every corner of that old temple. The murmur of the guests died down as everyone sought their places on the polished wooden benches, which shone under the light that filtered through the colored stained glass windows. The sun's rays painted the floor with red, green, and blue spots that seemed to move to the beat of the bells. I took my place in the first row next to a couple of cousins who had traveled from out of state to accompany us. One of them, leaning toward me, whispered excitedly, "Mr. Robert, your daughter looks like a queen." I nodded slowly, forcing myself to contain the rage that boiled inside me. I bit my tongue so as not to say anything. How could I explain what I had heard without destroying the moment everyone was celebrating? My face had to feign pride, but my heart was torn apart. The great wooden door opened slowly, and there appeared Emily, taken by Ben's arm. The musicians, who were still playing outside, fell silent suddenly and were replaced by the solemn sound of the organ. The echo of those notes traveled through the central nave like a long sigh. The guests stood up, turned their heads, and let out exclamations of admiration. "How beautiful!" someone murmured. "She looks like a princess," said another voice. I looked at her with a divided soul. Her smile was luminous, and her eyes shone like those of the girl who once hid behind my legs at the ranch. But behind that smile was a blind innocence, a wrong love that I had not managed to prevent. Ben walked by her side with a firm step, his chest raised. From time to time he adjusted his tie, and threw complicit glances at some of his friends, sitting near the aisle. He even sketched a twisted smile, almost mocking that only I seemed to notice. The priest began the ceremony. His deep voice resonated on the high ceiling of the church. The choirs responded with soft songs that mixed with the murmur of prayers. Everything was perfect in appearance, except for the unbearable weight I carried in my chest. My hands gripped the edge of the bench with so much force that my knuckles turned white. In front of me, Emily advanced step by step toward a destiny that I knew was poisoned. When the moment of the vows arrived, I heard how her voice trembled with emotion, repeating the words the priest indicated to her. Ben, on the other hand, recited the phrases with exaggerated security, like someone interpreting a role already rehearsed. I observed him with silent hatred, while he looked at my daughter with eyes that I already knew were false. Upon exchanging the rings, the young people of the choir sang a sweet song that brought tears to several guests. I, on the other hand, only felt a pang in my stomach. Laura, always close, adjusted Emily's veil in that instant and threw me a quick, enigmatic look, as if she knew something more than she showed. That woman did not inspire trust in me, and even less so in that moment. The I do resonated loudly in the walls of the church. The people burst into applause. The bells rang out again, and the priest raised his arms to bless the union. I lowered my head, closing my eyes for an instant, trying not to show the bitterness that consumed me. Upon leaving, the atrium filled with confetti and rose petals that rained on the newlyweds. The band played again, this time with festive energy. Children ran behind the couple, throwing streamers. Women shouted, "Long live the bride and groom!" and the air smelled of gunpowder from the fireworks that thundered in the distance. Emily, radiant, waved with her hand, thanking every congratulation. Ben raised the glass of champagne that someone had offered him, toasting with everyone as if he were the owner of the party. A caravan of cars waited at the entrance. The bride and groom got into a car decorated with white flowers and cans hanging from the rear bumper. I was invited to take a place in an old truck with several relatives. The engine roared as we advanced toward the ranch on the outskirts of town where the banquet would be celebrated. On the way, my relatives commented enthusiastically. "That Ben has a good head for business, right?" said one. "With him, the Chestnut Grove Ranch is going to prosper more than ever," added another. I remained silent, looking out the window at the fields that extended until they were lost from sight. No one could imagine that what I had heard that morning turned those praises into knives that pierced me inside. We arrived at the ranch when the sun began to go down, dyeing the stone walls golden. The entrance was adorned with arches of purple flowers and yellow lights that hung from the trees. The atmosphere was festive, almost like a fair. In the main garden, round tables covered with white tablecloths extended as far as the eye could see. On every table there were platters of roast beef, mashed potatoes covered in rich gravy, and steaming casseroles that gave off an irresistible aroma. Waiters passed among the guests, serving glasses of champagne and drinks. The band kept playing, animating with happy tunes that made the youngest ones clap. A group of ladies danced to the beat, lifting their colorful skirts. Everything seemed like a portrait of happiness. Ben walked around the tables, greeting, hugging, laughing loudly. An air of triumph was noticeable in him, as if the wedding were not a commitment of love, but a contract signed for his own benefit. Everyone looked at him with admiration, calling him Sir, and congratulating him on the great family he now belonged to. Emily sat at the main table, surrounded by friends who talked to her non-stop. She smiled, responded with gestures, but I managed to see how, in several moments, she lowered her gaze, exhausted. No one else seemed to notice it. I stood in a corner with a glass of orange juice in my hand. I watched in silence with my eyes fixed on my daughter, as if fearing that at any instant she could break like glass. I decided to approach to talk to her, to ask her how she felt. But just when I took a step forward, Laura appeared again, always lurking. She leaned toward Emily, whispered something in her ear, and immediately took her by the arm. "Let her enjoy, Mr. Robert. It is her day," Laura told me with an artificial smile, guiding Emily toward another table. I stopped dead in my tracks. I felt the rage rising to my throat, but I forced myself to hold back. I lowered my gaze, stepped back, and remained motionless, resigned to seeing how my daughter was led from one side to the other like a puppet. The noise of the banquet continued around me, the clinking of glasses, the laughter, the endless toasts. For everyone, it was an unforgettable party. For me, it was the beginning of a nightmare. I stayed there, apart, with my heart in pieces, aware that I was witnessing the bitterest wedding of my life. Just a few days passed after the wedding, and all the noise disappeared suddenly. Where before there was music, toasts, and congratulations, only an uncomfortable silence remained that weighed in the air. At the ranch, the horses neighed as usual. The workers continued with the harvest, but I noticed that conversation stopped when I approached. Something had changed in the atmosphere, and not for the good. That morning I decided to go to the downtown market, as I did every week. It was my custom for years to buy supplies and spices for the house kitchen. I got into my truck and drove to the city center. The traffic was agitated. People ran with their bags. Street vendors offered their merchandise shouting. Everything seemed normal until I crossed the entrance of the market. From the first step I took, I felt the stares. They were not the usual ones. They were not cordial greetings or gestures of respect. They were long stares, accompanied by murmurs that made no effort to hide. I walked through the main aisle between fruit and vegetable stands. The smell of fresh cilantro and roasted meat mixed with the smoke of the grills. However, what weighed most was the whispering behind me. A woman who sold vegetables, with her apron stained with dirt, spoke with a neighbor of the next stall in a tone loud enough for me to hear. They say Mr. Robert invented things about his son-in-law out of jealousy of losing his daughter. The other woman let out a dry laugh and replied, with so many demands that old man has, obviously he scares away the suitors. I kept walking without stopping, but the words pierced me like needles. I stopped in front of a spice stand, where the owner, an older lady who had known me for years, barely greeted me. Normally she offered me samples, or asked about the harvest at the ranch. This time she lowered her gaze and limited herself to weighing the order in silence. When I extended my hand with the money, her fingers barely brushed mine, as if she were afraid to get too close. I put the bags in my satchel and turned to leave. It was then that I heard the laughter of a group of young people who were near the butcher shop. One of them shouted sarcastically, imitating a crude voice, "Fat pig! Fat pig!" The laughter exploded around. They were the same words I had heard from Ben's mouth days ago, now turned into public mockery. I felt shame burning my face. I gritted my teeth, lowered my head, and squeezed the satchel tightly in my hand. I said nothing. I kept walking with long steps, dodging people until I went out to the street. The city air hit me full on, but it did not cool my rage. On the way back, I passed an alley where a group of children were playing ball. As soon as they saw me, they dropped the ball and began to run around me, shouting in chorus, "Fat pig! It is the fat pig!" And they started laughing, escaping between bursts of laughter. They did not know what they were saying. They were just children repeating what they heard in their homes, but every syllable weighed on me like lead. I stood still for a moment, watching them move away without saying a word. Pride prevented me from showing pain in front of them. Upon arriving back at the ranch, the landscape looked the same as always. The workers were in full swing, cutting the ripe fruit and loading it into wooden crates. I greeted them as always. They responded with courtesy, bowing their heads. But I noticed something different in their eyes. A couple of young men looked away quickly, as if they did not want to face me. It was then that Julian approached, an old farmhand who had worked with me for more than 30 years. With his hat in his hand, he leaned a little and whispered to me in a low voice, almost paternal, "Mr. Robert, do not pay attention. The town talks a lot." I thanked him with a gesture, but his warning only confirmed what I had already sensed. The people had begun to believe Ben's lies. That night I sat on the porch of the main house, looking toward the horizon. The sky was clear, and in the distance the city lights could be seen blinking like a swarm of fireflies. Dogs barked at some neighboring ranch, and the song of crickets filled the darkness. I rested my elbows on my knees with my head between my hands. In my life, I had faced droughts, loss of crops, even the death of my wife, but I had never felt an isolation so cruel as this. Knowing that my own community, the one that had seen me work the land for decades, now looked at me like a resentful and ridiculous old man, was a pain difficult to swallow. I lit a cigar and watched the smoke rise in spirals in front of me. Every puff was a useless attempt to expel the shame that oppressed my chest. The night wind brought the smell of the flowers and the dust of the roads, but not even that familiar aroma managed to calm me. I stayed there until late, listening to the distance of the city and the solitude of my own thoughts, and I understood that what had started as an insult in the mouth of a despicable man had now become an echo that propagated through the whole town. I, Robert, the man who had dedicated his life to the ranch and his family, was starting to become the target of mockery. The silence of that night made it clear to me it was no longer just about protecting my daughter. Now I also had to recover my honor, before they buried it completely under laughter and rumors. It was a hot afternoon, one of those where the air seems to stand still over the city streets. I still felt on the back of my neck the weight of the rumors that were repeated in the market, in the square, even in the chats of the ranch workers. I decided, without thinking too much, to visit Emily in her new house over in the historic district, where she had moved with Ben after the wedding. The neighborhood was silent, almost elegant, the houses with old facades, with iron balconies and cream-colored walls, seemed to look at me with indifference. The trees were in bloom, and their purple petals fell on the pavement like a carpet. In the middle of that calm, some children played ball in the street, shouting and laughing. An older lady, sitting on the sidewalk, embroidered with patience and looked up just to greet me. I stopped in front of the door of Emily's house. I took a deep breath, knocked softly. A few seconds passed, and the door opened. There was my daughter, with a tired face, marked circles under her eyes, but with that forced smile that hurt me more than any insult. "Dad, what a surprise," she said, trying to sound cheerful. I hugged her briefly and entered. The smell inside was a mixture of strong tobacco, liquor, and new paper. The living room was in disorder. On the center table there were several glasses with remains of wine, full ashtrays, and papers scattered everywhere. In the corner I saw Ben sitting behind an improvised desk. In front of him he had a pile of folders and documents. A half-consumed cigar rested in the ashtray, leaving a cloud of smoke that filled the room. With the other hand he held an elegant pen. By his side, Emily signed one sheet after another, without even stopping to read. I approached slowly. I felt a blow to the stomach, seeing how my daughter, trusting, gave her signature as if it were nothing. "What are you signing, daughter?" I asked, placing a hand on the back of her chair. Emily looked up just for an instant, smiling with fatigue. "Dad, they are minor procedures for Ben's company. Nothing to worry about." Before I could say anything else, Ben raised his head, flashed a smile that froze my blood, and added with a soft voice, "Exactly, Mr. Robert. They are just administrative documents. Nothing important." I did not move. My eyes scanned the disordered papers, and between the bold lines I could distinguish several times the phrase, "power of attorney." I also read clearly, "Chestnut Grove Ranch." I felt my hands freeze. Ben stood up, took a bottle of tequila from the sideboard, and poured 3 glasses. He extended one to me with a kind gesture. "Are you staying for dinner, Mr. Robert? A drink before the meal will do you good?" I shook my head, trying to maintain calm. "No thanks. I was just passing by to see how you were. I have to return early to the ranch." Emily got up from the chair and went to the kitchen. The sound of plates and glasses was heard in the distance. I took advantage of those seconds. I leaned over the table. With trembling hands, I discreetly opened one of the folders and, pretending to adjust my glasses, took the cell phone out of my pocket. I took quick photographs of every sheet. My heart beat like a drum inside my chest. I read fragments. Land mortgage, loan guarantees, transfer of rights. It was enough to confirm the worst. Emily's footsteps resonated in the hallway. I put the phone away suddenly, closed the folders, and let myself fall into an armchair, pretending to browse a magazine that was there. Ben, watching me from his seat, took a puff of the cigar and exhaled the smoke calmly, as if enjoying a secret that I was just discovering. Emily entered carrying a tray with sandwiches and a pitcher of hot coffee. She left it on the table with a weak smile. "Dad, try some. They're still hot." I took one, barely tried a bite. The cheese tasted bitter to me. "Thanks, daughter, but I must go. I have pending matters at the ranch," I lied, getting up quickly. I hugged her tight when saying goodbye, inhaling the scent of her hair as if I wanted to record it in my memory. She returned the hug without suspecting anything. Ben approached the door to open it for me, with that half-smile on his face. "Take care on the road, Mr. Robert." I looked him straight in the eyes, looking for some trace of humanity. I only found arrogance. I left. The fresh air of the street hit me with force. I walked a few meters, hearing again the shouts of the children who continued playing ball, oblivious to the hell that I had just discovered. I got into my truck and started it. Halfway there, I could not take it any more. I stopped at a neighborhood cafe with metal tables painted green and plastic chairs. I ordered a black coffee and, with trembling hands, took out the cell phone. I reviewed the photos one by one. Everything was there. Absolute power over Chestnut Grove Ranch, land mortgage, bank loan guarantees. My daughter had signed without reading, handing over to that man the key to everything our family had built for generations. I stayed looking at the screen for a long time, with a cup of coffee getting cold between my fingers. People entered and left the place. The bustle of the city followed its course, but I was paralyzed. The world suddenly seemed to wobble under my feet. In that instant, I understood that what I had heard the day of the wedding was not just a passing insult. It was the prelude to something much darker. Ben not only despised my daughter, he was using her as an instrument to strip the inheritance, our entire life. I finished the coffee in one bitter gulp, stood up, and walked back to my truck. I started the engine and returned to the ranch. In the rearview mirror, I saw how the city was left behind, and in my mind, there was only one idea. I could not stay with my arms crossed. Not this time. Emily's signature, stamped again and again on those papers, was a chain that tied us to the destiny of that man. And I knew that, if I did not act soon, the Chestnut Grove Ranch would stop being our home to become the booty of an imposter. I promised myself that night, driving under the lit sky, I was going to unmask Ben, even if it cost me my life. The next morning I could barely sleep. The noise of the roosters at the ranch found me sitting at the kitchen table, with the papers photographed on my cell phone and a coffee that had gone cold. My heart was beating hard. I knew I had to move fast. I prepared a briefcase, put away the printed photos, and drove toward the city, where Victor was waiting for me, an old lawyer who had been a friend of my family for decades. His office was in an old building with dark wooden walls and a smell of dust mixed with printer ink. The shelves were crammed with worn folders, with faded labels that told of years of lawsuits and defenses. Victor received me standing, with his white hair combed back and those glasses that always slid down his nose. "Come in, Mr. Robert. Sit down." I took the photos out of the briefcase and handed them to him. He observed them carefully, one by one, frowning more and more. "This is serious, Mr. Robert. With these signatures, your son-in-law can sell the whole ranch. Not only that, he can also mortgage it, put it into debt until leaving it in ruins." I remained motionless, as if someone had given me a blow to the stomach. The silence became thick between the two of us. "What can I do, Victor?" I asked at last, with a broken voice. He left the papers on the table and looked at me fixedly. "We need more evidence. The photos are not enough. A judge would say that your daughter signed of her own free will. We must demonstrate that there is deception, manipulation, even betrayal. For that, we will need someone to investigate thoroughly. I know the right person, Isaac Fuentes, An ex-police officer. Serious man, blunt. I nodded in silence. I had nothing left to lose. The next day I quoted him in a cafe downtown, one of those old places with brick walls and wooden tables scratched by time. The aroma of cinnamon and fresh-baked bread filled the place. I was nervous, playing with the spoon of my coffee when Isaac appeared. He was a man of about 50 years, skin tanned by the sun, gray mustache, and a look as sharp as the blade of a knife. He dressed simply with a worn leather jacket. He brought a small notebook in his hand. He sat in front of me and went straight to the point. "What do you want me to investigate, Mr. Robert?" I told him everything. The insult I heard at the wedding, the rumors of the town, the documents Emily had signed. I passed him the photos I kept on my cell phone. He looked at them without flinching, took a sip of black coffee, and nodded. "I will follow him. That guy does not seem clean. I promise to bring you something solid." We shook hands and he left just like that, leaving behind a strong smell of tobacco and leather. The following days were eternal. At the ranch, I tried to occupy myself checking the harvest, giving orders to the workers, but in every break I checked the cell phone, waiting for news from Isaac. Finally, one night, it rang. I found him. "Come to the hotel. I have proof for you." My heart accelerated. I drove to the historic center where he was waiting for me in a discreet hotel with an old facade. I went up some narrow stairs and found him in a small room, with the curtains closed. On the table was a thick envelope and his open laptop. He handed me the envelope first. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside there were clear photographs. Ben holding hands with an elegant woman, leaving a luxury restaurant in the city. Another photo showed him hugging her by the waist, laughing together as if they were a couple of a lifetime. "Her name is Valeria Guzman," explained Isaac, "executive of a major bank. Apparently she is something more than a mistress." I passed the photos one by one, feeling the rage clouding my sight. Then Isaac turned the laptop toward me. "Listen to this." He pressed play. Ben's voice came out clear, unmistakable. "That Emily is easy to manipulate. With her signatures, the entire chestnut fortune will be ours." Afterward, Valeria's shrill laugh filled the room. "Putting up with a little pig is worth it for so much wealth." Then the sound of glasses clinking and more laughter. I froze. The air got stuck in my lungs. My hands were sweating. For a moment, I thought the ground was going to open under my feet. Emily, my daughter, the woman who still slept hugging the illusion of a happy marriage, was being used and ridiculed in the cruelest way. Isaac turned off the recording, poured black coffee into a styrofoam cup, and put it in my hand. "Here's what you needed, Mr. Robert." "Evidence?" "Now it depends on you what to do with it." I looked at him without being able to articulate a word. I only nodded, put the envelope and the file on a USB drive that he gave me. I left the hotel with weak legs. The night air hit my face, but it did not relieve me. I drove back toward the highway, and passing a taco stand, I stopped. I ordered one, had it in my hand, but my stomach closed up. The meat, the cilantro, the red sauce, everything smelled good, but it was impossible to swallow. I stayed sitting in the car with the food intact on the paper plate, looking at the photos on the cell phone again and again. Ben's face, smiling next to that woman, chased me like a demon. The words of the recording resonated without pause in my head. Little pig, fortune, manipulate. I knew that was only the beginning. What I had in my hands was not the end of the betrayal, but the proof that the war was just beginning. And I, at my 68 years, was going to have to fight it. I started the engine, left the food on the seat, and drove back to the ranch, with the rage and pain lit like coals in my chest. After listening to the recordings and seeing the photos that Isaac had shown me at the hotel, I could not sleep all night. The image of my daughter being deceived consumed me, and although I already had proof of Ben's adultery and his plan of dispossession, something told me that a piece was still missing to complete the puzzle. Isaac, as if he had read my thoughts, called me a couple of days later. His voice sounded grave, direct. "Mr. Robert, there is someone else. Ben's brother-in-law, Arthur Ramirez. He lives on the outskirts of the next town in a cheap bar. He can be the key piece. I did not hesitate. I prepared my old blue Ford F-150 truck, the same one I had used for years to take crops to the market, and left at dawn toward the highway. The road stretched endlessly between cornfields and rows of crops that shone under the sun. The old radio barely managed to tune into country music, and every song reminded me of the loneliness I was carrying. As I approached the town, the mountains began to draw long shadows, and houses appeared on the sides with their faded facades. The town, with its stone streets and colonial houses, received me with a melancholic air. The smoke from food stalls rose in every corner. I asked a couple of times until finding the bar that Isaac had described to me. The building seemed forgotten by time, walls stained with humidity, a neon sign half working, and a wooden door that creaked when pushed. Inside, the gloom was charged with cigarette smoke and the echo of a sad song playing on an old jukebox. I saw him in the back in a secluded corner. Arthur Ramirez, Ben's brother, was hunched over the table, with a bottle of cheap beer in front and a wrinkled shirt. His messy hair and red eyes spoke of a sleepless night, and I approached slowly, dragged a chair, and sat in front of him. I am Robert, from Chestnut Grove, Ben's father-in-law. Arthur raised his head. His cloudy eyes looked at me with contempt. Did you come to defend that wretch? Go away. I have nothing to talk about with you people. I slowly took out the envelope I carried in my briefcase and put it on the table. He hesitated for an instant before opening it. His hands trembled as he passed photo after photo. Ben smiling, hugging Valeria Guzman as if they were a married couple. Arthur's jaw began to tense. Damn him! Just like always, he spat with rage. I then took out the cell phone and played the recording. Ben's voice resonated between the stained walls of the bar. That Emily is easy to manipulate. With her signatures, the entire Chestnut fortune will be ours. A dense silence fell over the table. Arthur squeezed the beer bottle until his knuckles turned white, and suddenly he smashed it against the table, spilling foam. Several people turned to see us. The bartender, accustomed to scenes like that, kept cleaning glasses as if nothing happened. Arthur looked at me with glassy eyes and began to speak, almost spitting every word. That unhappy wretch ruined us. He convinced my father to invest in a business that never existed. He left him without a dime. My old man, upon discovering it, collapsed from a heart attack. My mother, since then, is in bed, unable to move. And he continued living as if nothing happened, lying, swindling, swearing that everything was for our good. I swallowed hard. Hearing that story was like confirming what I already sensed. Ben had not only deceived Emily, he led a whole life leaving destruction in his path. Arthur, I need your testimony. It is not just for me. It is for my daughter. For justice. He hesitated, lowered his gaze, took a long drink of the little that remained of the beer. The silence lengthened, broken barely by the squeaking of a chair and the murmur of other patrons. Finally he looked up, with contained tears. Okay, I will speak. That man deserves nothing. I raised my glass of beer and clinked it with his. The dry blow sounded louder than normal, like a pact. We agreed to meet soon at Victor's office to prepare a formal statement. I got up to leave. Arthur remained in his corner, lighting a cigarette with hands still trembling. When I crossed the door, the night breeze hit my face. The cobblestone streets shone under the yellow light of the street lamps, and the distant sound of some bells accompanied me as I walked toward the truck. I started the engine and drove slowly through the town that was being left behind. In the rearview mirror, the lights of the bar seemed to blink like embers in the darkness. For the first time in weeks, I felt that I was not completely alone. I had found an ally, someone who had also been a victim of the same snake. As I advanced along the return road, between shadows of fields and sleeping lands, I had the certainty that the battle against Ben was not only mine. Now we were two wounded men, united by the same betrayal. And in that silence of the night, with the roar of the engine as the only company, I repeated to myself, justice sooner or later would arrive. The weeks prior to the trial were an eternity. Every day that passed, while I watched the ranch workers bend their backs under the sun or the neighbors pass in front of my ranch, with looks between curious and suspicious, I knew that the moment of truth was approaching. I had the evidence, I had Arthur's testimony, but still I felt an immense weight on my shoulders. In that room, not only would the future of my lands be decided, but also the honor of my daughter and my entire family. On the appointed day, I woke up before dawn. I dressed in a freshly ironed white shirt, a dark suit that I kept for important occasions, and in the inside pocket I placed my rosary, the one that had belonged to my late wife. I drove to the city in silence, with my hands firm on the steering wheel of the truck and my heart beating against my chest. The county courthouse rose imposingly, with its high columns and stairs that seemed endless. From afar, the crowd gathered could already be seen. Neighbors, curious people, some ranch workers, and even people who had once repeated the cruelest rumors against me. Now everyone wanted to witness the fall or redemption of Mr. Robert. Upon entering, the murmur was deafening. The walls of the courtroom were high beige, and the national seal hung in the background, watching everything with solemnity. I sat in the first row next to Victor, my lawyer. He praised the files calmly, although I noticed how his fingers drummed against the table. Even the most experienced could feel the tension. On the other side was Ben, dressed in a very expensive suit, probably paid for with my daughter's money. He smiled with that arrogance that characterized him, throwing winks at those present as if he were at a party and not at a trial. Beside him was Emilio Ramirez, his cousin, restless, moving his legs and looking at everyone with suspicion. When I saw Emily enter, my heart shrank. She wore a simple black dress. Her eyes were swollen from crying so much. She walked slowly, accompanied by Laura, who whispered in her ear with a closeness that made me uncomfortable. My daughter avoided looking at me at first, but I did not take my eyes off her for a single second. The tolling of a bell announced the start. The judge struck with the gavel, imposing silence. Victor stood up with a sure step. His voice resonated clearly in the room while he presented each of the proofs. The photographs of the documents signed by Emily, the powers of attorney, the mortgages, the loans requested in the name of the ranch. The attendees murmured louder and louder. Here is the evidence that Ben Ramirez manipulated his wife to sign without reading, granting him absolute power over the family patrimony. The judge nodded, and Victor asked permission to play a recording. Ben's voice flooded the room. That Emily is easy to manipulate. With her signatures, the entire chestnut fortune will be ours. Immediately, Valeria's laughter resonated. Putting up with a little pig is worth it for so much wealth. The murmur turned into a wave of indignation. I heard several women cover their mouths. Some men curse in a low voice. I saw Emily shrink in her seat, with tears running down her face. Ben, red with fury, stood up suddenly. "Lies! That is a montage." The judge hit the table. "Silence! If you interrupt again, you will be expelled." Victor remained firm without losing his composure. Then he called Arthur Ramirez. I saw him enter through the side door, transformed. He was no longer the defeated man of the bar, but someone who had decided to stand up against his own brother. He wore a clean shirt, his hair combed back, and in his hands he held a small wooden cross. He stood in front of the judge and began to speak with a hoarse voice, but clear. "That man, my brother, destroyed my family. He convinced my father to invest in a fake business, left him in ruins, and killed him with a heart attack. My mother remained bedridden since then. I saw him do it. I heard him lie. And now I know he does the same with this family." The entire room remained silent. Some people sobbed. Others murmured, "That one tells the truth. Poor family." Ben stood up again, trembling with rage, and pointed at Arthur. "You are envious. You always were." 2 guards held him by the arms to force him to sit down. The judge made a gesture to Emily. Everyone held their breath. My daughter stood up, trembling, with her hands pressed against her chest. Her broken voice filled the room. They deceived me. I trusted him, but I want a divorce. The words rumbled like thunder. There was an instant of absolute silence, and then the room exploded in applause and exclamations. The ranch workers who had come to support me stood up. Some even shouted, "Justice! Justice!" I squeezed my rosary tightly. My lips moved in a silent prayer while I felt my eyes fill with tears. Emily, for the first time in a long time, turned her head toward me. Her gaze crossed with mine, and with a thread of voice barely audible, she whispered, "Dad." That single dad was enough to give me back the strength I had lost in so many months of pain. The judge struck the gavel once more. Legal deliberations will continue before passing final sentence. But the court has heard enough to consider the accusations serious. The audience rose amidst murmurs and discussions, everyone giving their opinion on what they had seen. Ben, although he still tried to sustain his arrogant smile, could not hide the sweat on his forehead, nor the trembling in his hands. I left the room slowly, surrounded by voices, pats on the back, shouts of support and curiosity. I walked toward the exit with my heart beating strong. I knew that was not over, but the scales of justice were already clearly tipping in our favor. That day, under the city sun that shone on the esplanade of the courthouse, I understood that the battle was reaching its climax. And although the final sentence was still missing for the first time in a long time, I felt that the truth was beginning to make its way. A week after the last hearing, the final sentence was set. That morning I got up before the sun. I barely tried a little coffee. The knot in my throat did not let me swallow anything else. I put on the same dark suit I had used in all the hearings, as if it were a kind of armor, and kept my rosary in the inside pocket. When I arrived at the city, the county courthouse was surrounded by people. The esplanade was packed. Curious neighbors, ranch workers, law students, street vendors offering bottles of water, and even people I did not know but who had found out about the case through the press. The journalists had cameras installed on tripods, microphones raised, and approached me as soon as I set foot on the steps. "Is it true that your son-in-law mortgaged the ranch, Mr. Robert? What do you expect from the ruling? Do you think there will be jail for him?" I did not respond. I lowered my gaze and kept walking with a firm step, crossing the crowd that opened to the sides. I felt the flashes of the cameras hitting me like lightning. Inside the room, the atmosphere was solemn, but charged with tension. The benches were full. I recognized several laborers from the ranch, some with hats in their hands, sitting next to ladies who murmured prayers. On the other side, the curious crowded, expecting a show. The judge entered, and everyone stood up. The echo of the gavel against the table rumbled on the walls. The reading of the sentence began. Every word seemed to take an eternity to reach my ears. Ben Ramirez, 7 years in prison for fraud and forgery. A murmur ran through the room. I saw how Ben, who until that instant maintained a haughty smile, turned pale suddenly. He hit the table with his hands, stood up abruptly, and shouted with fury, "This is an injustice. Everything is a lie. They want to destroy me." The guards came forward immediately, held him by the arms, and placed the handcuffs on him. The image of that man who had believed himself so untouchable, reduced and struggling, remained engraved in my memory. The judge continued imperturbable. "Emilio Ramirez, 3 years in prison for complicity." Emilio, sitting next to Ben, broke into tears. He held his head with both hands, begging for mercy. "Please, Your Honor, I did nothing." I was just following orders, but his pleas were lost between the pages of the file. At that moment, I raised my eyes toward the back of the room. There was Valeria Guzman, the mistress. She wore dark glasses, an elegant dress, and crossed arms. As soon as the sentence was heard, she stood up calmly and left the enclosure, without looking at Ben even once. In the hallway, I managed to hear her voice, cold as steel. "You're no use to me anymore." That phrase was like a tombstone falling on Ben's pride. I also saw Laura, Emily's friend. She remained shrunk in a corner, trying to go unnoticed, but the murmurs did not forgive her. Traitor, accomplice. Some pointed at her with their finger. She lowered her head and left in a hurry, hiding among the crowd, not daring to look back. Meanwhile, Emily was sitting next to me. Her hands were sweating, intertwined with mine. When she heard the verdict, her body trembled. She leaned toward me with tears rolling down her cheeks and whispered between sobs, "Dad, forgive me for not having believed you." I hugged her, feeling all her pain spill on my shoulder. There was no reproach in my heart, only relief to have her with me again. The public, unable to contain themselves, burst into applause. Some workers from the ranch stood up and shouted, "Justice! Justice!" The walls of the courthouse rumbled with that word. I, with wet eyes, squeezed the rosary between my fingers and murmured, "Thank you, Lord, thank you." Upon finishing the hearing, the room became a whirlwind. Journalists ran, the curious commented. Guards escorted Ben and Emilio toward the exit. Insults rained on them. Thief! Traitor! Ben turned his head for an instant and our eyes crossed. His look was charged with hate, as if he still believed he could take revenge. But I no longer feared. He had fallen, and everything he had built, based on deceptions, crumbled over him. On the esplanade, the flashes and microphones pounced on me and Emily. The questions multiplied. I did not stop to respond more than with a single phrase. "The truth won." I said those words with firmness, holding my daughter by the arm and guiding her through the crowd until reaching the truck. She walked by my side, still fragile, but with her eyes set forward. When we moved away, I saw through the rear-view mirror how Ben was put into a police vehicle, handcuffed, surrounded by shouts and boos. For the first time, it was not him who laughed. It was the whole town that condemned him. And I, although I knew that my daughter's pain would take time to heal, felt that that day a chapter had closed. Justice had spoken. The truth had won. Just a few days passed after the sentence, but they seemed like years. The echo of the applause in the courtroom still resonated in my ears, mixed with Emily's tears and Ben's defeated look. However, what came next was what truly gave me peace. My daughter decided to return to the Chestnut Grove Ranch, our home, the place where everything began and where she had to be reborn. That morning the air was impregnated with the smell of wet earth. The sun began to rise over the fields, dyeing every ripe fruit golden. We walked together, Emily and I, between rows of trees loaded with fruit. The workers collected the harvest and placed it in wooden crates. Every so often, someone greeted us with respect. "Good morning, Mr. Robert." "Miss Emily?" She responded with a shy but sincere smile. She wore a simple white shirt, blue jeans, and wore my old wide-brimmed hat on her head. That image filled me with pride. Seeing her with a firm step, writing in her notebook and talking with the administrator about sales contracts to the local supermarket. For the first time in a long time, I saw her secure, strong mistress of herself. While she reviewed numbers and gave instructions, I went to the stables. I checked the cattle with the farmhands, felt the wood of the corrals, observed the animals feeding in silence. When I returned, I found Emily laughing with a group of workers who surrounded her. One of them, with a loud voice, said what everyone thought. "Miss Emily, now you are in charge." Her words reached me like a balm. Those men and women who had doubted me when rumors poisoned the town, now recognized in my daughter the heir of the ranch, and in me the figure who never gave up. At noon we sat on the porch of the main house. The wooden table was served with steaming stew, crispy biscuits, and large pitchers of iced tea. The wind blew softly, bringing the smell of the ripe fruit mixed with the humid earth and the song of the birds. Emily looked at me with firm eyes, different from those of the naive girl who had walked toward the altar weeks ago. "Dad, I'm not the same anymore. I learned not to trust blindly. Now I want to take care of what belongs to us." I lit a cigar, inhaled deeply, and with a serene smile, put my hand on her shoulder. That is what I always wanted for you, daughter, that you knew how to defend yours. In the afternoon, we took a walk through the whole ranch. We walked to the garden of purple flowers, the one her mother had cared for with so much love. Emily stopped in front of the place, placed a small bouquet of flowers on a framed photograph of her that still rested in the main room. She remained in silence with her hands together, and I knew that in that gesture there was as much pain as hope. The night fell slowly, with the city sky illuminated by a blanket of stars. I sat on the wooden balcony in the old rocking chair that had been my refuge so many times. On the table, next to me, rested the photo of my wife, some books yellowed by time, and a cup of hot coffee. Emily, on the other side of the table, browsed a contract with concentration, underlining some points with a pencil. The oil lamp illuminated her face, and for the first time I saw in her the determination of a woman who had suffered, but had not broken. The silence was broken by the crickets and the distant singing of the workers who had stayed to watch the harvest. Emily looked up and gave me a calm smile. "Thank you, Dad, for not giving up." I raised my coffee cup, held it for a few seconds, and looking her in the eyes, responded with a firm voice. "The sweetest revenge was not seeing him in prison, but seeing you free and standing, my daughter." We stayed like that, sharing that instant. Me in my rocking chair, her with her papers, and the ranch illuminated in the distance with the voices of the workers singing old country songs. It was the sound of a new beginning. In that moment, I understood that all the pain, the humiliation, and the struggle had had a purpose: to give my daughter back her freedom and give our family back its dignity. And while the stars shone above us, I knew that the Chestnut Grove Ranch, our home, was back in the right hands. I have learned in my own flesh that blind trust can destroy us, but also that a father's love never gives up. Today I look at my daughter free, standing and stronger than ever, and I know that all the pain was worth it. The lesson I take with me is clear. Never let anyone trample on your dignity or that of yours. The truth always finds its way, however late. Thank you for accompanying me to the end of this story. May God bless you and your families, and may you never lack the strength to defend what you love. A big hug from the heart.